This video is brought to you by Atlas VPN.
If I was asked to say the first word that comes to mind when I think of the medieval joust, well, I would say epic. I mean, two medieval knights in full armor with lances going at each other, you can't get more epic than that. But what would be a close second? Would the word dangerous be fitting? In other words, how dangerous was the medieval joust? Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and understanding how dangerous the medieval joust was in actual statistical terms is not easy task. In fact, this video should be considered to be more of a thought provoker, if you will. But if you try and Google this question, the answers that you get. Okay, check this out. People ask, what are the most common injuries in jousting? Men often were bruised, skewered, and decapitated during jousting matches. Often. I love how it goes from often bruised, which I mean, you would think, well, yeah, often bruised, you know, they go with each other, to often decapitated. Yeah. Let's click this thing. Let's see where it goes. 451, unavailable due to legal reason. What, did they all get arrested for it? Well, good. Figures. Well, how about we try and answer this really interesting question, jumping right into the sources I'd rather believe, medieval people themselves. I personally know of no dedicated and systematic database analysis on casualties for the Joust of Peace over the centuries, neatly divided by country, period and typology as it should be. Therefore, for this video we'll be examining contemporary sources to see how they report the injuries and their severity. One thing we know is that both light and severe injuries during tilting were at least relatively common, and death was not unknown. So what we have to work with is a lot of isolated or incidental evidence of injuries and even deaths at tournaments, but this is far from being a comprehensive data set that will give us precise results. Moreover, when working with events from vastly different time periods and radically different environments, we'll have to take into consideration the fact that we will inevitably run into a lot of different variables. But does the data we have today enable us at least a rudimentary or generic analysis? As we put together the anecdotal accounts we have access to, we also have to consider other possible venues of relevant information. How does literature talk about the joust? And what was the general perception of the common people in medieval Europe? As one last point when it comes to the methodology utilized during this video, experiential knowledge would be a fantastic piece to add to our puzzle, so it would be splendid if more specialized channels such as Modern History TV with Jason, or also Zach Evans, were to make a response video and perhaps talk more about their own experiences when it comes to the possible dangers that they have faced themselves when they tried the joust. But for now, let's have medieval people talk. Chronicles of Joust from the period may provide us with some interesting data we can use to help with our quantification of danger and severe injury probability within the medieval joust. Particularly in the late medieval period, some joust events were meticulously recorded, and today I'd like to read from a Spanish source. Pero Rodriguez de Lena, a royal notary from Castilla, mid-15th century, recorded detailed account of the Passo Honroso, an important event which took place in la provincia de León, 1434, which of course included jousting. On this description he talks about injuries, deaths, armor failures, which were all described in detail. He recorded 724 courses in which 165 lances were broken. Alright, as we calculate this, 724 courses, 165 lances got broken. That's about 23% of all lances used during these courses resulted in a broken lance. Now, of course, this item of information doesn't necessarily mean that more injuries occurred as a result. All it tells us really is that these people were pretty good, since breaking the lance is what you want during a tourney. Of course, occasionally you would have a dismounting, but what you want to score a point is to break a lance. Still, a small possible correlation could be present because if they hit each other a lot and well, with enough force behind properly executed technique, this might result in injury, particularly if the lance breaks on your face instead of your shield, as we will see. But this of course is a speculative observation of mine, so take it with a grain of salt. Also considering the fact that some of the injuries described occurs precisely because the lance didn't break. So we read: spear penetrates eyeslot near the target's left eye and draws blood. Victim claims, "'Tis nothing, 'tis nothing." Minor wound on the inner parts of the left gauntlet. The unfortunate Asbert de Clermont is struck through the eyeslid with such a mighty blow that he pushed the entire head of the spear through his left eye into his brains. Right arm pierced near the armpit, great loss of blood, victim feigns, bystander feigns. Well, yeah. Gaping wound to the bicep with a palm's length of the broken spear pierced through to the other side. Okay, let me say this. A guy just got his head penetrated and clearly died because, I mean, without brains you can't live. Well, actually, scratch that. The website that we read just a moment ago, most likely written by brainless people. But I digress. So, people do get injured, and sometimes horribly. I mean, someone just died with a lance through their head, and the first night we read, he almost got hit in the eye. He got like the lance through the eye slit, and he just goes, "'Tis nothing, 'tis nothing." These people were badass. I'm starting to think that this scene from Monty Python, although being sarcastic, perhaps was actually based on an historically accurate attitude towards these kind of duels. Think about that. Now, if you found any of this interesting, well, there is much more to come, as we will see after a brief word from the kind sponsor that made this video possible, Atlas VPN. Now, if you're like me and you like to surf the internet looking for interesting historical information, it's a great idea to do it in safety, which is why you should totally use today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network that makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel, and this way it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, it hides your IP address, and online activities. Atlas VPN is a great choice because it was developed by cyber security specialists, and among other things, it gives you access to the Data Breach Monitor, which is a security feature designed to track any data breaches related to your online account, automatically scanning any leaked information. But another add-on through Atlas VPN is the fact that you can use Netflix from any countries, regardless of where you are. So let's say that you wanted to watch a show that is only available in the UK, but you live in America. No problem, just change your country through the VPN and boom, access granted. I always have Atlas VPN active on my machine, so that is because one account lets you use multiple devices. I personally really like Atlas VPN not only because it's a great choice, but also because it's really affordable, and that links to today's special offer. Get the Christmas price cut. That's $1.70 a month for 3 years plus 6 months for free. If you've been considering getting a VPN but you weren't sure about the prices, then now is the time. And don't forget to click the link in the description. That's $1.70 a month for 3 years plus 6 months for free. Keep in mind that this is a time-limited offer, so be quick and click the link in the description. And big thanks to Atlas VPN for sponsoring my video. Arm in doublet and shirt penetrated beneath the right pauldron. Is my arming doublet thick enough? Squire? Spear skates into the right biceps and breaks. Victim is wounded twice in the biceps and has his hand dislocated, either from the spearhead, a splinter of the spear, or his own grapper breaking. Spearhead penetrates the right arm near the shoulder joint next to the armpit in such a way that the spearhead poked through to the other side. Holy mother of... which caused a gaping wound and a lot of blood flowed out of it. Victim dazed for a while in the lists. Hit on brow, victim suffers moderate reversal of fortune. Victim hit on bever, suffers moderate reversal of fortune. Stroke on the wrapper of the armet, moderate reversal of fortune. Okay, let me tell you this. Next time I suffer any form of injury, whether it be me falling down the stairs or perhaps falling from a freaking skyscraper, or, the worst of all, hit my little toe against the omnipresent piece of furniture at night in any house, I'm gonna say, oh, I just suffered a moderate reversal of fortune. 'Tis nothing. Stroke on the wrapper of an armet, moderate reversal of fortune. I'm starting to think that reading medieval sources might not be the best thing when it comes to the quality of my social life. Good thing I'm already married. Victim hit in the teeth with the same blow, and he stunned him and made him suffer a serious reversal of fortune, and from the point at which he was struck up to the head of the list, he almost fell off his horse. So you hit a knight on the teeth, and he almost falls. Goodness gracious, these people. Moderate reversal of fortune, and his opponent dislocates his hand. Yeah, I wonder what the parameter is for when something is moderate and when something is serious. I mean, if, you know. Self-inflicted serious reversal of fortune? What, did he push like down, square and circle? What happened? Well, let's see. When Jouster hits the tilt, he hit the tilt, you know, the barrier. That's what he hit the tilt, and lodges the butt of his own spear between the front arcan of the saddle and the skirt of the cuirass over his belly. How did that happen? So that if he had not collided with the tilt, both horse and rider would have almost certainly have fallen. So he just, nothing serious, just hit the frigging, yeah. A hit on the bever stunned him and made him suffer a serious reversal of fortune. Listen, I don't care, hate me all you want, I'm never wearing a bever and a salad during a joust. It's either a frog mouth for me or I'm not tilting. Victim who was recovering from a previous injury stunned for a moment in the list. This is so interesting, because we often think about how blunt impact, even though you've got a helmet, might stun you for a moment. But I find it so fascinating when it's actually medieval people, specifically an eyewitness during a joust, that mentions that this in fact happened. Then it just has more charm to it, doesn't it? And value. Breastplate punctured on both sides, judges insist on repair, left pauldron disgarnished. I love how the judges had to insist on the repair. So this guy's breastplate was punctured, I suppose, on both sides, and he's like, it's probably another one of those, 'tis nothing, and the judges are like, no mate, you've got to, stop, just stop him, can you repair, just force it, just repair it, just do it. I mean, the more I read this, the more I like knights. Pauldron lane disgarnished, lance rest broken away. This is a lance rest, by the way. Imagine how powerful of an impact to break off a possibly steel lance rest. If this isn't hardcore, I don't know what is. Breastplate penetrated, repair necessary. Okay, so a small point on this penetration of breastplates. Of course, this shouldn't be interpreted, in my opinion, as, well, these people's breastplates were penetrated all the way through, because if they were, then we wouldn't be talking about repairing the breastplates, because, I mean, the knight would be out of action because he would probably be dead, unless undead knights are allowed in the joust, which I don't think. So when he says this, I think it means that the breastplate is punctured, of course not fully penetrated, but this still is very dangerous, because if you don't repair it, then, if an opponent's lance tip ends up going into the same spot again, then it could basically compromise the effectiveness of the entire suit of armor. So yeah, repair necessary. But lance rest broken, grapple and gauntlet disgarnished, pauldron disgarnished, counter wing broken off, basage of spolder disgarnished, pauldron disgarnished, penetrated breastplate must be repaired, guard brace cast to the ground, gauntlet ring 4 struck off. I mean, this is great. It kind of reminds me of Soul Calibur, they go into pieces. Rondel bent in half. This is my therapy. Why do I like this so much? Do I need professional help? Bever knocked to the ground. Yeah, you enjoy your bever. Okay, I think we're read enough for now to just have an idea, but if you want to read the entirety of the accounts, I'll leave them in the description box. But I think this already speaks about the pivotal role armor had during the tournament, because all of these injuries, or the majority of these, would have been lethal if armor wasn't there, which kind of counters what I've already found, of course, in a separate article on Google where they say that the joust was dangerous because of the armor, so there is that. Dear Anglophone speakers, as a non-native speaker, I would suggest that you might need a new interpretation / definition of the expression no-brainer. But it's your language, not mine. It is, however, very important to understand that as we read these sources, the very fact that all of these incidents were reported most likely speaks for their rarity, in the sense that they were worth noting. So these shouldn't be considered to be things that happened all the time, but these are sort of special moments that the author decided to write down because they would have been jaw-dropping for the medieval people too. But they did happen, and these do constitute some of the possible risks that you would face knowingly as a knight in the joust. And this speaks greatly of the sort of courage that knights in medieval Europe who participated demonstrated just by participating, surely having a full understanding of the stakes and risks. Also considering the obvious fact that medieval people didn't have access to modern medicine, and therefore some of these injuries would have been a lot more serious for them than it would be to us. Still much respect to modern jousters. To open an interesting and very relevant small parenthesis on this daring attitude in the face of danger, I'd like to briefly discuss this expectation of courage in a cultural medieval key. A certain level of social expectation when it comes to display of courage was absolutely exercised in Europe in the form of societal pressure towards the attitudes in the face of death demonstrated by knights, and also the denouncing of cowardice. In the 13th century, Ramon Lull wrote a literary work called Book of Knighthood and Chivalry, where he tells us what it meant to be a knight and brings forth the core values of the chivalric code. And among the many different expectations and duties that a medieval knight would have had, he also tells us, open quotes, knights ought to take coursers, that's war horses, to joust and go to tourneys. Courage was clearly celebrated in medieval chivalric literature too. In fact, we could say that bravery is a defining characteristic of the knight. As a matter of fact, one of the principal recurring themes that we see all across medieval literature when it comes to the medieval knight is that death and losing a battle was preferable to the shame of cowardice. We can see this in La Chanson de Roland, but we also see this in very famous works and legends such as the Arthurian legend, where, at least according to the version we read in Lancelot d'Aulac, the Lady of the Lake tells us, knights should be more afraid of suffering shame than of dying, and Lancelot agreed. I mean, if Lancelot agrees. Nice hair. Charney wrote a knight's own book of chivalry in the 14th century as a detailed treatise on the rights and responsibility of knighthood. The book includes instructions on how a lady should behave when she saw her knight honored by others, but the author, even though he clearly valued knights who were sort of veterans of actual battlefield more, he also has a lot of respect for knights who participate into the jousts. And I mean, it makes sense, we can respect that. I mean, I have a lot of respect for MMA fighters, but I mean, a veteran who actually went to war is like, wow. He also tells us, while the cowards have a great desire to live and a great fear of dying, wrote one knight, it is quite the contrary for the men of worth who do not mind whether they live or die, provided that their life be good enough for them to die with honor. As we dive into medieval literature even more deeply, we see that this general idea that a medieval knight is expected to be brave can also backfire. Jean Froissart reported the story of Woufflard de la Croix, who abandoned Sir William Balliol and their men while in battle, shameful display, and fled into the marshes, where he was discovered by his enemies, who killed him, refusing to ransom such a coward. So if he hadn't ran away, maybe they would have, ransomed, but it is what it is. But we also see that this theme of bravery associated with knights is also found in more didactical texts. In the Livre de Chevalerie, Geoffrey de Charmy advised young men at arms who wanted to be strong and of good courage to fear shame more than death. Even Christine de Pizan was in fact drawing on even older principles, for example the De Re Militari by Vegetius, with the idea of retreating before the battle was seen as dishonorable. And she called upon noble men to be courageous for the following three reasons. For the sake of the prince, the country, and the chose publique, which, it's public thing, but it could be translated as the public good in this case. Still in the realm of teaching, but this time specifically about family matters, we read in the Enseignement Paternel, a text produced by Hugues de Lannoy, written in 1430s, that a man teaches his son that it's better to die honorably than to be shamed by cowardice, urging him to accept death in battle rather than to come back in shame. Could you imagine telling your own son that? I think this is interesting because it helps us understand that medieval knights were under double pressure from both sides. The aristocracy, the king, the prince, their fathers expected them to be brave, but so did the people who were expecting this sort of bravery from their betters. And since we are discussing the concept of courage in the face of danger when it comes to medieval battles, we cannot help but mention the late medieval king of Bohemia, Jean of Luxembourg. He was fighting for King Philip VI at the Battle of Crécy on the 26th of August in 1346. Now, in Jean Froissart's famous account, the blind Bohemian king, when I say blind, I mean he had contracted ophthalmia, an inflammation of the eye which can result in blindness, like in this case. So, the blind king rode into battle, led on either side by his retainers who had connected their horses to his to lead him. Together, they fought most bravely. His last words before the charge being, "Far be it that the King of Bohemia should run away. Instead, take me to the place where the noise of the battle is the loudest. The Lord will be with us. Nothing to fear. Just take good care of my son." The king died during the battle. Another aspect that can help us frame more correctly our assessment of how dangerous the medieval joust was in period is the response, at least when it comes to official responses, by the Catholic Church and the sort of bans that were sometimes issued by the ecclesiastical authorities. These tournaments were dangerous enough for the church at various times to call for bans on them periodically. That being said, the church condemned the vanity and immorality that surrounded the tournaments as much as the violence, and when we say dangerous, this doesn't only involve physical danger in this case, in the minds of the Pope. In 1130, Pope Innocent II proclaimed jousting was sinful and against the teaching of the Church. He banned tournaments and prohibited a proper Christian burial to those who lost their lives in the sport. The ban was lifted in 1192. Now, of course, this is an early 12th century type of joust, so it's very different to the late 15th century sort of regulations. We'll get to that in the next section, but I believe this is still pertinent, and there are a couple of things we need to say. Let's have a look at a few other bans so we can understand this in context. The Second Lateran Council, Canon 29 to be precise, under Pope Innocent II in 1139, banned the use of crossbows against Christians and archers. We prohibit under anathema that murderous art of crossbowmen and archers, which is hateful to God, to be employed against Christians and Catholics from now on. Also, Canon 14 forbids. We entirely forbid, moreover, those abominable jousts and tournaments in which knights come together by agreement and rashly engage in showing off their physical prowess and daring, and which often result in human deaths and dangers to the soul. So that's interesting that he says often when it comes to death, but of course, this doesn't necessarily need to be taken as a calculated statement with actual statistics in mind. It's from his perspective. Still interesting though, should be noted. I also want to read Canon 12, you'll see why in a second. We decree that the truce is to be invariably observed by all from sunset on Wednesday until sunrise on Monday, and from Advent until the octave of the Epiphany, and from Quinquagesima until the octave of Easter. In other words, they were trying to restrict warfare from Monday to Wednesday. Now, what's important to understand about these bans is even though they were put into effect, a lot of people completely ignored these. So, were Christians still using crossbowmen and archers against each other? Absolutely. Did they actually follow this instruction en masse? All countries, when it comes to not having war if on a Friday or a Thursday? No, they still did it. And in the same way, a lot of people still did the jousts, no matter what. The majority of knights still jousted, regardless of what the Pope thought. But even though a Pope could have a strong disdain for jousts and tourneys, we shouldn't imagine all of Christendom united in such a condemnation. Indeed, both in literary productions and writings within the Church's priesthood ranks, we still find plenty of supporters of the joust, even from a religious perspective. As we read, Charney tells us, God is gracious towards those who find their life of such quality that death is honourable, for the said men of worth teach you that it is better to die than to live baselessly. Yet Matthew Paris, a monk who wrote in the 13th century, called tournaments a bloody sport indeed. So, variable opinions. Now, there are several chronicles that sometimes bring forth numbers that are in fact sort of difficult to believe. There is, for example, a German chronicler from 241 that tells us that during a tournament event, there was a staggering number of 80 knights and squires who were killed during the tournament. But is this real? Are these numbers exaggerated? Of course, this could be a case of shock factor by exaggeration. At the end of the day, we know that one thing the medieval chroniclers did was to increase, for example, the number of deaths during battles and battle reports. So why wouldn't they do it also for tourneys and jousts, but also we have to consider another possibility. It also depends on how massive of an event we are talking about and for how many days, if not weeks, this event continued. So there is a huge difference in the number of deaths and injuries, in fact, not necessarily deaths, but even injuries between a private or even public personal duel or some sort of like little event, a regional event, an international event, and even more so all the way up to the sort of incredible and very illustrious and expensive events organized by the Medici family as a way to show their power and wealth in Florence in late medieval Italy. And it is also important, as I mentioned before, to discuss, well, what sort of period we are specifically talking about, because indeed the very early types of tournaments were more of a sort of mock battle between two actual armies that, even though their objective wasn't to kill each other, still it was basically almost unregulated. They were trying to ransom and kidnap other people so that they could take or strip them of their armor and then sell it back or sort of have a ransom. And even though you're using blunt weapons, I mean, you can still kill someone, particularly if there is a massive battle going on. But then again, as Joust becomes more sophisticated and it becomes more of an event with pageantry and ladies and music, also to celebrate, for example, weddings, as we were mentioning, then that's a different thing because there is a whole new level of organization. So we see that definitely there would have been a higher level of injuries, even serious injuries and death in early jousts, which could also connect to the fact that the church was like, hey, you've got to relax. And then as we go forward all the way up to the late 15th century and early 16th century type of jousts, which were now not perfectly safe because we still have several accidents, but it's definitely safer in a comparative key to the early types of tournaments. And one last aspect that we need to underline is the fact that, of course, the death of a baron will definitely be recorded, but perhaps the death of a simple or lower ranked knight might not be. Also, the development of specialized jousting armor, which was thicker, heavier, more protective, was in a way a confirmation of what was considered to be a very dangerous sport. In 1501, regardless of such precautions, 5 participants were killed in a tournament in Rome. In 1524, Henry VIII was nearly killed in a tournament when the visor of his helm came open and he was hit in the face by splinters from a broken lance. In 1559, Henry II of France was less fortunate after he decided to take one more run at the end of a tournament. The constable, de Montgomery, shattered his lance on the king's shield in an accident, and a splinter from the broken lance entered the king's visor, fatally wounding him. Now that we have gone through several reports, what sort of specific physical dangers should we expect from such a hardcore sport? Well, blunt trauma, bruises, lacerations, concussions, broken bones, similar injuries, external injuries, internal injuries, dislocations, possible dislocated shoulders, extensive loss of blood, fatigue, thirst, overheating and abrasions, armor failures, saddle failures, in general equipment failures, and falls. There is also another type of danger which is mentioned in the sources and sometimes was taken very seriously by some medieval monarch, which doesn't really have to do with accidents but with intent. As we have mentioned, sometimes people who held a grudge, oftentimes also in connection with a lady, would use tournaments, tourneys and jousts as an opportunity to actually legally kill their opponent because they had a grudge with him or because they hated him so much. So these things also happened. They're of course frowned upon and heavily condemned in the sources, but if they mention them, it means that some knights just went a little nuts on each other. So, all in all, was the medieval joust dangerous? Absolutely. Was it more dangerous than even modern hardcore reproduction of the joust? I would say so. But it is absolutely something that requires more research, and we need more data to be able to give specific statistical numbers. But of course, I want to know after this presentation what you think. Do you have more things that you can bring to the table? Absolutely do it in the comments below and let's have a very interesting discussion. How high do you think, from a percentage standpoint, was the possibility of you dying if you participated into a joust, and what was the level of severe injuries that you could more likely expect to suffer, as opposed to the lower or lesser injuries? And last point, up to what extent, how high was the level of tolerance of risk from the perspective of medieval people when it comes to injuries that they would consider to be a lower injury, but for us, that might already be something that could disqualify the whole sport, considering modern regulations of safety. But absolutely let me know in the comments below. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up. And if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Don't forget to click the link in the description below to take advantage of the amazing offer by Atlas VPN. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.